Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization. We are going to be talking about auto-scaling groups today, which I am super excited about as a ex-developer who used to build them. I feel like now is the time, many years later, for me to learn about the actual nuances of building these things. So I have my awesome guest with me today. But before we dive into the episode, we've always got to start with our lighthearted question, which is, have you had a frugal week or a splurgy week? Chat, let us know how your week is going. And don't forget, throughout the episode, you can drop any questions or comments in that chat and I'll be watching. But Steve, frugal or splurgy kind of week for you?
For the week, I'd say it was fairly frugal. The weekend was a bit splurgy, though, as they tend to be.
What did you get up to? Anything fun?
Restaurants, sushi.
Oh, that is going to be the one, but it's good quality. It's worth it. Shahad, what about you?
I don't know if you would count this as frugal or splurgy, but my girlfriend and I just moved, and we just bought a whole bunch of used cabinets from the Habitat for Humanity restore. So
Oh,
frugal because they were used, so saved
yeah.
$1,000 or $2, but also still spent hundreds of dollars. So
Oh
make
my
up your
God.
mind.
Yeah, I feel like I need a midway category that I'm gonna have to add like a bonus option of just like sensible. That's probably the one I would do. Love a deal. I feel like I've had a splurgy week. I've had one of those weeks where suddenly I'm just like, yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll buy that. Adam, who's my manager, suggested I get some NFT cards where I can like program in a URL. So if I'm out and about, I could be like, hey, LinkedIn, and then tap it. He did tell me you could buy a ring which did it, and I could basically like punch people's phones, and then I would be able to log in and like set up like link to my LinkedIn account. But he was like, I don't think you should really be punching people's phones. So we won't.
I think you're going NFC. NFTs have a
I
NFC.
slightly
was going to
different
say,
connotation.
I was like, as I said it, I was like, is that the right word? And I was like, am I dyslexia just thinking? Thank you. See, these guys are smart guys, so I bring them onto the show to talk all about stuff. So let's get into it. Welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm an essay advocate here to help you with your FinOps journey or any kind of technical concepts you want to chat about. And with me today are my awesome guests, Steve and Shahad. So let's get into our 1 minute origin story. So Shahad, why don't you kick us off with your 1 minute origin story?
Sure. I have been working at AWS for about 8 years now. I've been an AutoScaling SME subject matter expert for 5 or 6 of those. Before that, I was doing some generalist IT jobs. Took a class as part of my master's that was supposed to be for a completely different field. This was a random class, and it was on AWS, and went, oh, okay, that's fun. Let's completely pivot to that.
I love that kind of change. And what's the reason you're here talking about ASG? What's your kind of fundamental speciality in this area, or why you
Yeah.
wanted to talk to us?
Yeah, so I've been a SME and auto scaling for about almost 6 years now, and I just enjoy the service. It's a free service that is entirely about making you pay less money and be more resilient, which just really captivated me when I started working here.
That's such a good way of putting it. It's a free. I never think about it because it's like a construct. It's not like a thing, but it's a free service. Good point. All right, Steve. What about you?
well, first off, I didn't know that about Shahad, so I guess we don't know each other as well as I thought. So I think you'll find this on LinkedIn pretty easily if anyone goes searching, but I spent 13 years at Adobe. I was originally hired to build data centers as the company moved from product to service. And those services, they were quite successful. And we rapidly discovered how much AWS could save us. And so we moved to AWS, and I spent the next couple of years shutting down data centers. I specifically joined AWS to evangelize Spot. I enjoyed the effort and the results, the outcomes at Adobe with Spot instances, and so I wanted to share that with more customers. So I joined the team. I started speaking with our global and strategic customers. It was a fun ride, and started learning more and more about different things, Graviton and autoscaling groups, which I took a kind of a keen liking to. I've been kind of advocating and evangelizing autoscaling within the group for quite a while, even though we don't have a dedicated team. And getting to do things like this is the reward for me.
Yeah. And I remember when we went to reInvent, Steve messaged me like, hey, here's a cool cost announcement. And that's kind of sparked off when I was planning out this season of Twitch. I was like, hey, what have we got from reInvent? So we might drop in some of those, but we're going to go through a lot of the fundamentals when it comes to auto scaling groups. But let's see what's going on in the chat. So we had a couple people who are splurgy on delivery. Love that. A frugal splurge is what Cloud Stripe is suggesting is the combi. And John at AWS said, this is my favorite show. How nice. and everyone's saying hi. We've got people from Brazil, people from India, loving it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Please use that chat function as much as possible. Ask these guys any questions around auto-scaling, or if you have any general cost ones, we can try and answer that. And if not, then we also have our cost optimization at amazon.com email, where you can email any of your cost optimization questions. Now, I want to kick off with a quick poll to see who our audience is when it comes to this. So, I've gone too early. I've gone too far on one of the questions. I've spoiler alert. But chat, you can use for our polls. And if you drop in a 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for basically I live here, is this your first time watching AWS? This is Twitch, so feel free to drop any of those numbers in there to let us know. Have you guys checked out many of the Twitch streams on here?
Yeah, I think Steve and I have both been on once or twice before, and watched a couple of colleagues that have done some interesting streams. They're always fun.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to have people who is coming back. Great to see people coming back. And there's even people from Bolivia. Wow, this is so cool. I love seeing the range of people from different kind of backgrounds and audiences.
I was going to say obrigado, Brazil, but if we've got that many people from that many countries, I can't possibly thank everybody in their native.
Yeah, it's all of them. I need like an AI to just like pivot all the different hellos back across it. And someone's saying it's their first time watching Amazon, which is great. Welcome to the show. So let's get back into it. Steve, I need you to tell me, what is an auto-scaling group? Let's lay it out. Let's get back to the fundamentals. What is it?
All right, so my favorite way of introducing auto-scaling groups, this is in person with customers, internal events, and streaming with Shahad a couple of times, is we like to think about working backwards at Amazon. And so I've taken auto-scaling groups and I've done exactly that. So it is a group of instances. They could be homogeneous, they could be heterogeneous. They are performing the same work.
What do those words mean?
Oh, we'll get into that for sure later. But the idea of having identical types of machines, like say C instances, C5s, or having a mix. Maybe you've got C's and M's and R's, and we will get into this, but different types of machines versus single type of machines. So it's a group of instances that are performing the same work. Maybe they're pulling messages from a queue. Maybe they're an API farm. Maybe they're backing a container platform. So it's a group of instances doing the same job. And from a scaling perspective, the idea here is that we can be elastic. We can have many running at one time, or we can have a few running at any time. So, and we're going to talk about why exactly we want to do that. And the auto part is the fact that we can do this automatically for you. You don't have to manage this yourself. And so we bring, we believe, both cost optimization and resilience to the party with auto scaling groups in that manner.
Nice. Good foundational explanation. I get it. And when it comes to the different ones, the thing I always think of is EC2 works with auto scaling. That's where I kind of use them in the past. Are there any other services that we can use auto scaling with?
Absolutely. So we refer to that as application autoscaling, and we've got some backend services that can use this, and customers can use that as well. But autoscaling groups are sort of the most, I think, customer accessible thing that we present, and what we really were kind of planning on focusing on today. And if we want to get into application autoscaling, let's do another show.
Yeah. And we also definitely have other services in AWS that piggyback on top of auto-scaling groups. There's things like ECS and Batch that have these fairly tight integrations. And you can also, Steve was talking about queues and all those sorts of things. There's a whole bunch of services that you can indirectly on your own tie in with them. Anytime you need a group VC2 instances, you can have them, and you can use that for whatever other service integration you want to work with.
And we've already had a question that I want to dive into quickly to clarify something, which is auto-scaling done by default, or does it need to be configured? Configured is the answer, but we're going to go through the different types of auto-scaling to make sure when you configure them, you make the right choice, which I'm going to say for myself, like I said at the start, when I used to be a developer, I think I used to use the wrong one. But in my defense, I think there were less. So I don't know. I was given a template and I used the template, which is not what you should do, everybody. You should go and look at what you need before you did it. But anything you want to extra say on this of the setup? But we are going to go through this right in a bit, so we can kind of cover it then. So stick around and make sure you stay on the channel, and you'll see how it will be set.
So just real quick spin on that answer. Yeah. You do have to configure it, but it should be your default. Like this
I'm going to cut that out, but on social media later. 10 minutes past, good to know. That was a very good spin on the concept. Okay, so let's keep going in terms of how does auto scaling, you kind of mentioned this, Steve, already, but I don't know if you want to jump in on like how does auto scaling fit into the world of cost optimization and maybe even resiliency?
Yeah. So auto scaling, like I mentioned in my intro, one of the things that really drew me to it is it's an entire service that's designed to make you use less AWS. Which, yes, I know business reasons in the long run. Sorry, everyone, hitting my microphone. That's good for everyone. Um, but auto scaling, by its very nature, is designed to let you scale out to what you need to help you be highly available when you need it, and then scale in when you don't. I can have a wonderful little picture here that we can use for this image that you will all see in the stream for anyone who's watching us is the desired capacity of an auto scaling group. This is just how many instances we want to exist at any given point in time. So you can see that for around 2 weeks, this group was scaling from down to 6 instances up to around 100. And so we have a nice daily pattern here. And then during the weekend, it's staying pretty low. And so if you were going to have a on-prem data center or even just standalone EC2 instances, you got to pick where here you want to be provisioned. Like, so let's say right around this 98 number. You can live with a teeny bit of running hot during those peaks, but then you have all this lost opportunity where you could be saving money during your troughs, especially this huge long weekend. And then you have the high availability and the fault tolerance that you were talking about, stuff where even if you were provisioned, and that's fine, you have a little bit of peak time there. Suddenly you get these 2 days where something wild happened and you needed to be almost double that. And that's when all your alarms would have been going off. Everyone would have been getting paged. People would have been trying to flip through, hopefully not manual pieces of paper in a playbook to figure out how do we spin up some extra instances? What's the process? Hurry, hurry, hurry. And you have no idea when it's safe to bring them down. You don't know if that peak is going to come back the next day. You don't know if you're going to go back to your normal pattern. And so then you're stuck running at 190 instances for a while. And so you really get that huge cost savings that you can see in this pattern where, I mean, that's yeah, what, 30x your trough, something like that, that
Mhm.
you'd be just sitting there paying for.
Quick math by Shahad. And just to kind of
Possibly
extend
wrong
that,
math.
Shahad's outlining something that we see like somebody who's already in AWS. But from a data center, the pattern that you would see is that customers that are putting these workloads online would either purchase the minimum amount of equipment to just keep the service running. So let's just say the 100. So yes, they're wasting those instances in those troughs. But when they need to go to the 200, hold on, when they need to go up to 200, they don't have it, and at that point in time, their service breaks. So, like Shahad mentioned, you've got alarms going off, you've got all sorts of pagers. People are frantically trying to figure out what to do. But at the same time, you might actually break your software. You might actually break your service. And so, from a resilience standpoint, absolutely being able to burst out to those extraordinarily high, unexpected levels is a huge benefit of auto scaling groups. And then, of course, you can just see basically everything below that 100 point should be green if it's not actually being used. That's just all money that's not being spent. I'm not going to say saved. It's not being spent.
My favorite example is if you're manually provisioning, especially physical machines, you not are only provisioning for your peak during the work days. If you're a retail organization, in the US at least, you're provisioning for Black Friday, your single one big shopping day of the year, and then every other day has a lower peak and an even lower trough. But you have to have all that capacity ready to burst for that 1 or 2 huge days of the year, and that's just a lot of extra compute.
Yep.
Thanks for taking us through that. And I think having that visual representation is very nice to kind of see like, oh yeah, I don't need damaged compute every single day. It's all this kind of flexibility and resources. Someone said Black Friday in August, the most important for the United States. Yeah, we also have things like Prime Day, or if you have any sales, any of the big sales in companies, the biggest thing we hear them talking about is scaling. And like Steve mentioned, Spot is a good time for kind of using that to make sure that there is capacity, but you're not paying too much for that.
Being frugal.
Being frugal, that's it. When it comes to using these tools or using auto scaling, what tools are there available to help you do this? What are the different elements we need to be thinking about?
So I think probably the best way to answer that is paying attention to some sort of meaningful metric And so perhaps that CPU utilization, that's the easiest example to use. If your CPUs are sitting at 10%, then you're really not using the machines. You can think of it as no one really runs at 100%. So let's just say 80 would be your peak. So, that's 70% of your machine that's not being used. At the same time, if you're running hot, right? If you're running at 80%, you probably could be, you could benefit from having more machines available. And so having a meaningful metric is probably the best place to start in determining how you do this. If you look at containers platforms, things like horizontal pod autoscalers, right? This is something that allows you to run multiple instances of a service on the same machine as opposed to a single machine. So this is something that's built in with those, and that's how you define it. I need to make sure that my CPU load doesn't go over a certain point. And we can do the same with autoscaling at the EC2 level as opposed to at the task itself. And so metric is probably the most valuable thing in determining when you should be using autoscaling, how you should scale up, when you should scale in, that sort of a thing. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the different ways we can do that.
Brilliant. And I'm going to put this up from my point of view. I said this kind of a little bit already, but I think it's really worth people learning. If you're a FinOps persona, or if you're a technical persona, or a hybrid of the both, learning about these different use cases to start to ask the question when it comes to an architecture or an application, what type of auto scaling do you need, and when do you need it, and how do you configure it? Because these are the kind of questions where, like I said, we would just use kind of basic one, but never really check the configuration in detail. That is me being a bad developer. But what's good about this is we have 4 different options we're going to talk about today, and they're all for different use cases. So what is your use case? Well, backwards from that, like Steve was saying, so you can figure out which one you should do so you get the most optimal performance and benefits from this service. Now, the way that you do this and you configure these different things is through lifecycle management. Is that right, Shahad?
Yeah, exactly. So you need, going to Steve's backwards analogy, you have a group of things which are scaling automatically. The automatically is really, really key for auto scaling groups. You don't want to put anything in there that you have to hand configure. If part of your process is I SSH or RDP or whatever into the instance and set up the application, you're going to have a really bad day on auto scaling. Figure that part out before you migrate. And we have all these lifecycle tools to make it much easier for you to be able to do that. You can hook into them to have scripts automatically running as you're starting up, as you're tearing down. There's features around health check management, when and how things launch. We'll probably talk about some of those in more detail later. But the main point is there's a whole lot of tools to figure out how instances launch, how they live while they're operating, how they get torn down, when that should happen, how it should happen, and making sure that it works for all your different types of applications.
And just to quickly add to that, there's another aspect of the auto that we didn't touch on just yet, and that's managing the life cycles, specifically not the scaling aspect, but being able to pay attention to the health of an EC2 instance. So where you've got, for instance, a pet, as referred to in the dev world.
Oh, I haven't had that in so long.
So you've got a server that you've launched, and it's your pet, and you take care of it by SSHing or RDP into the machine to take care of it. What happens if that machine goes down? So assuming that an alert goes off, something like that, your pager goes off at 2 a.m, and you jump up and you manage to bring the machine back online, whatever. With auto-scaling groups, because they're meant to be clones, right? They're these machines that are all doing the same amount of work. So with auto-scaling groups and EC2 health check management, we're able to actually pay attention to the fact that EC2 machine is not answering for whatever reason, and we can just replace that. So an instance, let's say out of a group of 10, that for whatever reason it has a memory leak or whatever, and it drops out, that machine can be replaced. We can also pay attention to load balancer health checks. We can pay attention to EBS health checks. And if you want to build something custom, we can build those as well. We provide the tools for that. And so if there's any aspect of the machine that is considered unhealthy and you want to remove it from the auto-scaling group, it can be done automatically and replaced with a new instance.
The concept of a pet versus cattle is, again, like I said, I remember when that was first like the big thing, and now it feels like common day. But you're right, there's a lot of people, and I was at a customer yesterday and we were discussing the concept of scaling, and they were like, no, we have so many old school applications that involve you logging into the box, setting it up. If that is what you're dealing with, that is not when auto scaling is going to be useful. Like Shah said, you have to have these things automated and whatever CI/CD script, user data, AMI, whatever you need, that has to be part of it. So make sure that you have that kind of thing. But guys, any other things that should be considered before they start to dive into auto-scaling?
I just want to double click on what you were just talking about. I just brought up a tab here that we can show people. This is a, oops, I made it smaller. There we go. This is the original blog post for the release of AutoScaling, ELB, and CloudWatch.
Whoa,
You
that's
will
so
see this
cool.
wonderful word art from, I assume, I don't know, whatever art style from 2009. This is a fun little blog post, and there was very few features in autoscaling back when this happened. Autoscaling was pretty much exclusively designed for running on a web server, stateless. Very little of these extra things we're talking about. So as it's matured over the years, we've gotten more ability to scale, more ability to manage different use cases. And so if you do have to physically log in and do your own clickety clackety keyboard ops, then probably not the best. But there's a lot of in between there, between completely stateless, very easy to install web server, and completely manual install. And so there's a lot of tools here that'll help with some of those pet-ish applications when you can at least automate some of the stuff. And so there is a lot of room to use auto scaling at this point with those, and it's definitely something that the service is working on continuously improving. And if there's any use cases that anyone ever has that doesn't work, then always try and get in contact. We love to hear information about how we can make our services better. There's many ways to contact AWS on a variety of platforms.
Yeah, do. And if you could, Chad, if you share with me that link, I'll make sure everybody in the chat gets it.
Cool. And so I think closing out on things that you need. So it's an unattended launch, right? This machine needs to be able to launch on its own. So for example, you've built a launch template, you've got everything defined, like you mentioned, user data blocks, maybe you've got something in there, the AMI needs to be set, that sort of a thing. And so we do that through something called launch templates, which we'll show you. But the idea is that this needs to be able to launch on its own, and it needs to be able to shut down on its own without breaking a service. So for instance, launching part of a SQL group or something like that if it disappears, you're gonna have a problem. That would be a bad thing. But queue workers, API farms, these are my favorite examples of things that one just run phenomenally well on autoscaling groups. So that automatic launch and automatic stop. And we do, by the way, from the kind of that between pets and cattle mode, we do have lifecycle hooks, which allow you at the start to invoke certain commands. We've got an option where through warm pools, you can actually like configure the box and then have it just sit and wait. And then when it comes online, it can actually hydrate whatever, grab information and go online. And when you go to shut down, we can do things like offload logs, etc. Common use cases. And I think that kind of closes out on what you need for an autoscaling group.
Perfect. And let's get into a quick poll. So guys watching, how many of you have already used auto-scaling groups? One for yes, two for no. I want to see where our current audience is at. Drop that in or drop any comments in. There's also a question which I will jump to, which is where can I find old recordings? And if I just swap over while that's loading, then I have to swap over and do a different screen. There is a link I'll share in the chat which has all of our old recordings attached to it, so you can kind of keep up to date with all of these things. Or if you search keys to AWS optimization online, you'll be able to find us. Okay, I feel like it's time we get into some demos. I want to start seeing how these things fit together, and I can start asking my dumb questions. So let's kick off with getting into how do we actually set up these scalings? So Steve, wait, no, Shahab, you're doing the demo, right?
This one, yes.
All right, okay, let's get into it. So Steve, do you want to set the scene at all before we get into it?
Absolutely. So within the option to scale, we have many different ways that you can do that. Some of them can be very prescriptive. For example, if you look at the way container platforms use autoscaling groups in the back end, whether ECS or EKS, this is something where they're actually telling the autoscaling group, give me 10 instances, give me 11 instances, that sort of a thing. So that's what we refer to as manual scaling. And this is something that's available for customers as well. They can actually go into the console or through API, they can set the desired capacity. The next thing that we would look at is step scaling. And this is a bit more of an if this, then that type thing. So in this situation, add instances, or in this situation, remove instances. And so people can be very programmatic or very specific and prescriptive about how things work. But without question, the easiest way to do it is what we call target tracking. And so target tracking is something that we've introduced that allows you to, I mentioned the CPU temperature, right? So what percentage of that CPU are you utilizing? So let's say you set that for 60%. And by setting that for 60%, AutoScaling group can actually pay attention to, through a target tracking policy, what's the aggregate load across all the machines. Maybe some are a little warmer, some are a little cooler, but what's the aggregate across all the machines? And if that aggregate starts to get to a point where adding a new machine would bring it closer to 60%, or removing it would bring it back up towards 60%, that is actually something that we can then do automatically for you. So you don't need to say, if the load hits 70% aggregate, add 2 instances. You can if you want, and that's what we do with Step. But with Target, it will automatically do the math for you. And so absolutely the best way to go. I thought, do we have something on that for our demo, or yeah?
Yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so yeah, I was going to say, this is the AWS console homepage. There's a really cool new feature that just launched. Well, cool for probably just me, but you can now configure, when you click EC2, which of the consoles it goes into by default. So whenever I click EC2, it can now go into auto scaling for me, because this is where I go 80% of the time.
That's a cool thing.
So that's just something that I don't know how many of you care about, but I like it.
I do.
Thank you.
Chat, let us know if you cared about that or not. I'd love to see if people do.
Yep.
I think Steve will run through some of the other options that you have in creating an auto scaling group later. But in general, you can see all the groups you have here. You can see that, like we were talking about, you have other services like Batch and ECS that can integrate with auto scaling. I've got some of those set up here. But for now, we're going to go into this one that is already created to look at some of these scaling policies that Steve was just talking about. So we aren't going to talk about ye that shall not be named. We're going to talk about the modern scaling policies. Like we were saying, this service has been around a while, and so we have improved on things as we have gone. Steve, you want to talk about Step or target tracking in detail first?
I think target. So we mentioned Step, and again, this is something that works like target. You need to be prescriptive in what you tell it to do. You can base on percentages, that sort of thing, but it's the knobs and buttons that allow you to really tweak what it is that we do automatically with target. And so I think target tracking is probably the best way to get started in showing a demo. Also, we want to make sure we don't run out of time for the other stuff. So let's just go with target.
Yep. Okay, yeah. So you can see we've got a whole lot of options here with step scaling. You got to configure all these different steps, exactly when they should do stuff. Whereas target tracking, I just have a very clean, I'm tracking CPU when it's over 50%, and I can set a warm up. This is just saying how long we expect the instances to take until they're fully contributing to the group. And that's it. This will then create some CloudWatch alarms for me automatically. There'll be a little bit of a buffer between them so that we're not oscillating in our group. We don't want to be scaling out, which then causes our load to go down, which causes our alarm to trigger, which causes us to scale in, and then infinite badness. So it'll automatically take care of that for you. It also has a lot of intelligence under the hood where it can choose to ignore your alarm going off if it believes that that's going to be really bad. Like, for example, if our low alarm was, I don't know, say 40, 45, something like that, with our target at 50 here, but we only had 3 instances in the group. Being at 40, 45% CPU and removing 1 out of 3 is probably going to bring us back up over 50. And so it's intelligent enough to go, okay, I think I'm going to wait until the metric is actually a little lower. Or, hey, I've noticed that you have been oscillating a lot. I'm going to hold off a little bit and give a little extra buffer on the scaling in. And it has a whole bunch of things like that. Another nice one is I see I have 2 target tracking policies here. And so it will go, okay, I should scale out if either of them are high. We always want to favor high availability for you. But if one is high and one is low, it doesn't make sense to be bouncing back and forth. So we're only going to scale in when both of them are low at the same time. And that's all a bunch of extra intelligence that target tracking specifically has. That is basically how the feature has worked for the last 7-8 years since it released.
Shahad, when you were saying that the the two are high or two are low. What two are you talking about? Just to confirm.
Sorry, yeah. So specifically, I have these two target tracking policies, and so
The two policies. Okay.
yeah, so if the metric that this one is tracking, I just have this set on a custom metric that I'm uploading. If this is tracking a metric that is at say 60% right now, but this one is at 30%, we're going to be intelligent enough to ignore this 30% because something that you're telling us to track is still high, and that'd be very bad. We don't want to scale in when that's happening. But that's
Right.
unique to target tracking versus the other scaling policies.
Okay. So if you had a target tracking and a step scaling on the same can you apply it more than one to the same auto scaling group?
Yep, you can see right now I have these disabled for convenience. But yeah, you can definitely have more than one at once. It just takes a lot of very careful planning on how
I was going to
I'm
say,
do
like,
that.
it's gonna, and my question was going to be, if you have target and step, does the target have an awareness of the step, or was it only aware of other target? Okay, so if you're going to do target, kind of stick maybe with some of those. So just to go back to what you're saying at the start, the target tracking does it all for you. So you're kind of setting these soft parameters, and it sets up all the alarms around it. Versus the step, you have to be a little bit more hands-on.
Yeah, exactly. So the target I said I'd basically just set to track CPU and to track. I can go into the edit here real quick so you can see literally how simple this is. I literally just say, hey, here's my predefined metrics. You can define some custom ones if you want. But in this case, many people just track CPU. So just CPU, target 50, boom, done. Make my alarms, does all the adjustments for me, figures out, oh, the alarm is more breached right now. I should add more capacity. Whereas if I go into this step scaling policy, you need a policy for scale in versus scale out, whereas that's combined in the one target. You have to individually define them. You have to link that to alarm that you again are creating on your own. You need to explicitly state when it's between these amounts, add this much capacity or this percentage or whatever. So it gives you many, many knobs that you can tune. But with great power comes great responsibility. There's many knobs that you can mess up tuning. Yeah, and then so that is historically how it's worked. Steve, you want to talk about the improvements we did to target tracking while I show that on the screen?
I was just going to say real quick. So this idea of having two, first of all, you forgot to delete that policy.
It's for this Twitch. I need to delete it after the stream.
Oh, so it should say delete after I stream. Okay.
Right. I know what it means. You don't need to know what it means, Steve.
So what Shahad was mentioning about having multiple policies active at the same time, that we're going to favor the higher of the two. So if, for example, you're tracking CPU and Shahad mentioned that this is actually being paid, we're paying attention to CloudWatch metrics. Alarms are being set in CloudWatch metrics. We talked about that before, the idea of needing a metric. So this is where we're utilizing CloudWatch as part of AWS already to accomplish that. But let's say that you're looking at both CPU or network. So if either one of those was to get hot, so like you started seeing more usage on the CPU because for whatever reason the content of some queues is getting a little bit more CPU intensive, then we can scale out on that. Or for whatever reason, let's say you start streaming more data and your network starts to become more utilized. So with both of those active at any given time, it's going to pay attention to the highest of the two. And so the idea is protecting the customer experience with that.
Mm-hmm.
And from the standpoint of some new changes, so target tracking actually, as Shahad mentioned, I think inadvertently while sharing, is this intelligence of being able to pay attention to like what the workload's actually doing, and does it often see these spikes? These are very brief spikes, and then just kind of like go back to the normal model. Those types of things we can be aware of now, and using AI, we can actually make sure that we respect the sudden burst and we start launching instances, or we say this is one of those things where we're just going to cost you money. We're going to launch an instance and we're going to just turn around and shut it back down. And so this is one of the things that we introduced last year with target tracking, as well as high resolution. And so previously we had a period of time during which I think the product manager, Ankur, mentioned it best, the time to identify the problem and the time to respond to the problem. And so that problem being you need to scale out. So your CPUs are hot. So how long does it take us to notice that you need to go up in scale? And how long does it take us to do the actual work? Well, we can't change that. That's part of the AMI. That's how your software is built and launched. But what we can change is how long it takes to identify that you need to scale out. And so with high resolution metrics, we've made it possible to identify that much faster. So instead of a 3-minute time to identify, it might just be 20 seconds. So
Wow.
huge improvement. And this is more of the resilience aspect, being able to protect the workload as opposed to a cost. But at the same time, what's the cost of having a customer experience? So it's kind of one of those things that it pays off on the cost side from both aspects. Yeah.
And what have we got here?
This is just a blog post that's talking about the two new features Steve just mentioned. It's a before and after. It's showing that before, when a default 60-second period was being used, you had this very long time where your CPU was maxed out before it was able to actually scale. But now, with using a custom
Oh.
metric that's at a 10-second high resolution, you're able to scale out before you get to that critical, oops, everything's gone bad point. And so this can also kind of help with your cost, because if you know that you have a longer lead time on scaling out, you'll often just lower your target to be like, okay, well,
Right.
we need to do it earlier in the life cycle. But if you know that your application can start up fast, or however, whatever the timing is, you can then potentially run a little bit hotter and save some money by not having to run as many instances.
Brilliant. And I'm going to pause here for a second and do a couple of audience questions before we go into our other sets. So the first one is, how do ASGs work with savings plans RIs? I'll cover this, where they are the same as, if it's EC2, it's the same as any normal EC2. You can, if it's an instance that applies to the configuration of the savings plan or the RI, and it is going to save you money according to the back end algorithm that Amazon is like giving you the most saving, which is what they'll always try and do, then it will be covered by an RN savings plan. What you want to do is, when you are thinking about your purchasing of RIs and savings plans, to think about what your constant spend is, and that should be covered. And then on demand, if you can, maybe try and use for the spiky workloads some spot or just on demand, just so you can get the most saving. Do EC2 servers automatically auto scale? I would say no, unless you configure it, right, guys?
Right.
Exactly.
From an auto scaling group perspective, a server itself is not going to auto scale. We do have the compute optimizer that'll allow you to identify servers that maybe need to be larger or smaller. And so that's one way you can look at vertically scaling a single instance. But from the standpoint of automatically scaling out and scaling in, we'd basically be launching instances on your behalf without telling you if we did that, and you might not be too happy with your build. So,
That'd be bad. Or terminating something and you had something
even
special in there,
worse.
you might also be very upset.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. This is a long one, but I think it's going to be good. When we are architecting for the first time, how do we determine the minimum count of instances or tasks that should be running? Do you recommend we do a trial run and adjust accordingly?
Always test first.
Yes.
I think you can start by just saying, hey, if it's a workload already in AWS, if you're already running a certain number of EC2 instances, just start with that number running. You can set your scaling to be relatively conservative at first, and you'll start scaling in. If you had false assumptions about what your bottleneck actually is, that way you find them when you're conservatively scaling in before aggressively scaling in. But yeah, just start with a little extra. The scaling policies will dynamically adjust pretty fast, and build some confidence in the service. Make sure it works exactly how you think it should, and hopefully everything's fine. Steve, you got anything else? Or
No, I would actually, from the AutoScaling perspective, no. But from an instance selection standpoint, I would say absolutely. This is another thing that you should be doing testing. So Shahad and I have worked with a customer who's the extreme end of instance testing, and these people have worked out to the what, thousandth of a penny how much it costs to do a certain amount of work on a given instance type, and they've used that to make the decision of what types of instances to run. So touches a little bit on that compute optimizer conversation where we talked about like scaling up or scaling down vertically, changing the size of your instance. This could possibly be impactful across Intel versus AMD versus Graviton. This could be impactful across C versus M versus R, right? The different instance families we have. We have like 900 plus instance types right now. I heard this last number that I heard. And so with that, it's very difficult to choose. But if you can narrow it down a little bit and then start testing on those, then yes, test first everything to identify options and then also to identify your scaling metric.
yeah, you definitely want to do some performance testing to find what your bottleneck is. Like, a lot of people assume that it's CPU. I always cry a little inside when I see someone scaling on 20% CPU and they say it's because that's when my memory or my network runs out. And it's
Yeah.
like, Well, maybe something else should be adjusted then.
Choose the right metric.
Yeah, and someone else had already asked a similar thing, which is that metric is most important. But I think you guys have expanded on how to kind of do this, which is great. And last question before we move back onto our demo: how to integrate with Terraform automation tools with AWS. One thing I would say is that Terraform is a great way to deploy all of your instances, all the things that you can deploy in AWS. I believe you can deploy in Terraform unless it's something brand new, but it is something that you use to deploy versus something you need to like work into any services. So that would be the best thing. The only thing you think about is if you're going to do any CI/CD that be using Terraform. But yeah, it kind of sits outside of the scope of that. Right, let's go back to Shahad to finish off the other types of AutoScaling groups.
Yep. So I've got a predictive scaling policy up here. It's still on our automatic scaling tab. So predictive scaling, kind of like the name implies, is about proactively predicting ahead of time what you're going to do. So you can see I have a couple of them set up here so that I am able to look at the graphs. I'm just going to show one of them in the interest of time. We can see that it's showing, I'm going to remove some of these lines to make it a little easier to read. It was showing what these are here, what was actually observed, what capacity did the group need at a given time, what did we predict that we should have had, and how much in the past did we infer the requirement was going to be. And so it's basically just you can have it run in a shadow mode essentially, where it's just saying, hey, this is what I would have predicted, and lets you build
Oh,
confidence. It's really helpful then for if you have a spiky predictable workload, saying, let's scale ahead of time, get out ahead of that burst, and make sure your instances are up and running. Steve, I'm sure, is about to argue that this does not help with cost, but
I did not say that.
why? Oh, spill the tea. Why not?
I'll let you go first, Steve.
It's the grain at this moment. It's hourly grain. And so where I mentioned the idea that if you have two policies working together and one says high and the other one says low, that we're going to respect the high. So that number for predictive scaling will be at the top of the hour and it will maintain throughout the hour. So over time, we will learn. Like, for instance, like if you start seeing less traffic on Mondays than you used to see, we will see with predictive scaling, we will learn that needs to be lower. So we will adjust over time. But predictive scaling is really more about resilience, especially from your application perspective.
Yeah, I'd say the one type of application this really does help with cost, though, is if you are just constantly running really hot to run for your peaks. If you have twice a day, you have this big peak for, but it changes a little bit week to week, month to month, how big that peak is. This can really help make it so you're not constantly running really extra hot to run for those. So it really does depend on the workload and the use case. And just as a point, because this is the question that always comes up next, you do need to use this with a dynamic scaling policy. All this will do is increase your capacity. It's not going to lower it back down. We want to do that based on actual current load. And it's going to do, because it's running for that hour, there might still be a bit of spike above the baseline prediction for the hour that it's doing that you need to have a dynamic scaling policy like target tracking help fill in the gaps for.
Great. And the last one, have we covered scheduled scaling?
We have not yet.
We've not.
Okay, let's go into that one. I feel like this is the one I feel like I understand, and a very similar thing like we were talking about the Black Friday concepts, where you would. I feel like that one's. I could explain that one where you just you plan ahead.
Okay,
Right?
Steph, go.
No. Oh, we spent time.
Busted. While he fixes this, Black Friday is actually a great example of why you want target tracking policy in conjunction with predictive scaling. So if your regular Monday is 100 instances, 100 instances, 100 instances, and then, post Black Friday, you've got people checking on orders and all that kind of stuff, and you need to be at 150, predictive wouldn't do that. It wouldn't predict that you had an event and that something needs to happen as a result. So target tracking, absolutely critical to be running alongside predictive scaling. Good. Ideally with the same metric.
Good tip. Let's get back into the demo. All right.
Technical difficulties. Sorry, everyone. So just to show really quick what they were just talking about, if you have a scheduled policy here, you can set it up, blah, blah, blah. My recommendation is you generally don't want to just set the desired, because usually you're scheduling before your peak happens. And so you're just
Mhm.
going to end up scaling right back in or out, depending on which way you're going, if all you do is change the desired. You don't know for sure. Maybe you already started scaling out. Maybe you thought that your policy was going to be bringing you from 2 to 20, but for some reason the load started early and you're already at 25. If you
Mm,
explicitly set desired here, you're then potentially going the wrong way and doing a bad thing. So you only have to set one of these. You can set all three
okay.
if you want. But my recommendation is you usually just set the min and or the max, and that will drag your desired up or down if
Yep.
it's outside of that boundary. We also have time zone here to help with all of the wonderful countries that are dealing with time changes in the coming or recent weeks. Then start time. This is very important. One of the most common things I see messed up. What start time means is this is the next time the action will start. So make sure that if you're doing a recurrence, that your cron or whatever matches your start time. Otherwise, you're going to accidentally run your action once when you don't mean to.
Wait, I think I need to hear that again. What do you mean?
Start time means essentially it's the next time that it's the next time that it will start. So if I
Right.
set a
Oh,
start time of uh, tomorrow at midnight UTC, but my cron was for every day at noon, it's still going to run at midnight the first time, and then every time after that, it'll update this to be the next time the cron is scheduled for.
oh, okay. Okay, so you
So
want to
just
kick
make
it off
sure
at the
this
same time.
matches with your recurrence.
Right. Okay, cool. Anything else on those ones before we move on?
I think let's move on. We got a couple other things to hit, and we got time
I was just
time.
going to throw in my favorite thing on schedule scaling is that it does allow you to adjust the min and the max, right? So you can do this through manual scaling or through an API call, or you can do it through the console. But target tracking, simple, and step aren't going to do this. And so it's a really neat feature, like Shahad mentioned, set your minimum for 100 instances because you expect a sale to have a high demand. And if it doesn't go over it, it doesn't go over. But at least if it does, you've got that burst, and then that target tracking can pick up from there. But it's the only place that you can change min and max other than manually.
Brilliant. Okay, then. Uh, We've had a quick question, which is, I don't know how I ended up on this channel. Can tell me what is going on, basically. Yes, we are the keys to AWS optimization. So we're talking all about how to optimize resources in the AWS cloud. So we're talking on today specifically about auto-scaling groups. And if you have joined us partway through, then we're diving into that. Now, we've only got just shy of 15 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we continue on to talking a little bit about the choices of instance types. Is that ready for what you want to cover?
I think that's a good choice. Yes.
Okay, good. I was just checking because we're having great questions and good dialogue, and so we might trim a little bit off our plans of the episode. So we want to make sure we give you guys watching the most important information. So when it comes to choosing the right instance and family type, I'm sure this is going to be a big thing because there's going to be elements of what ones you choose for different auto scaling. But let me hand it over to these guys. So Shahad, give us a bit of an overview of why this is important and what are things to consider.
Yeah, so Steve touched on this earlier. You have all these different shapes of instances. You have the C family that's CPU optimized, M is kind of in the middle, R is more memory optimized. And so I gave that example of a customer that was scaling at 20% CPU because that's when they were out of memory. Well, they weren't using the right instance family to be optimized for memory. And so if they had just reshaped that a little bit to be the right family, they would have had a much more cost efficient group because they wouldn't have needed all of these extra instances to get the same amount of memory. There's obviously many other, maybe not obvious, apologies if it's not. There's many other instance families outside of those three main ones. And so there's even ones with super high memory and CPU and any of that sort of thing. So figuring out which are the best can really help you optimize your cost by having the things that are making it so that you don't have one bottleneck and everything else is being like 10% used or something like that. That's my high level summary. I'll let Steve go with any of the details.
So from an instance selection process, like in terms of identifying how you should use whether it's the RAM or the vCPU, what your bottleneck is, absolutely that's on point. Do we want to actually go through the process of setting up an ASG, and
Yeah,
I can
let's
show you
do
then?
it.
So we've been building up, we've been telling you all these things, and so let's actually like build an ASG here, an auto scaling group, and in that we can show how exactly you'd go about choosing a specific instance type. All right, so I'm on board. I don't have the fancy straight to auto scaling group things that Shahad has. He's much smarter than me. I still have to scroll, but I love the fact that auto scaling groups are at the bottom. I think this is why most people don't use them. Is hiding down here. But at the same time, it's like I keep my best friends at the bottom of my phone list, so I can just scroll all the way to the end, and there they are. So here we have auto scaling groups. We're going to create a new one. We'll just call it Twitch, and from a launch template perspective, so we mentioned the idea that launch templates exist. This is the best way to be launching instances, whether it be through auto-scaling groups or through EC2 run, however it is that you're doing it. Launch templates give you the ability to define an AMI and to perhaps include user data and other things. So there's a wealth of information that can be put into it, probably a little bit too much for us to dive into right now. So I've pre-built one, and in that I have not selected instance types. So here I've got my launch template defined. I'll say next, and we're going to start with manually adding the instance types. So for example, my favorite recent example of an actual customer story is M5A X large. So if I select M5A X large, I can leave it at that, and it's only going to launch an M5A X large. This is an AMD machine, and it's running 4 vCPUs, 16 gigs of RAM. But you can see down below that we've also offered, look at these examples that are also all 4 vCPUs and 16 gigs. We've got a few that step outside, but they are paying attention to the 4 vCPUs part. So an R instance has twice as much memory. But you can see we're still looking at the 4 vCPUs. So we're paying attention to vCPU when we do this. We can leave it at just these instances, or we can say that we'd like to be size flexible. And so here we have another option. If you don't want to choose these options, you have the ability to just remove them. But let's say that we wanted to keep them. The order in which they appear is the order in which auto-scaling groups will choose to use them by default.
Okay.
So an example—
Or on demand.
Or on demand. And so an example of this might be, let's say that you wanted the M5A X large, but for whatever reason, it's not in a particular availability zone. It's in 4 of 5 availability zones, or it's not in another region, but you want to use that same model for the auto scaling group. By having the M5A 2X large in there as well, because we changed to size flexible, then that would be the second choice if it can't get that. And so you don't end up with situations where your deployments completely fail. Also, if there's, for example, just none available at the moment, that we can't get the M5A X large, we're going to go for the M5A 2X large. And then maybe later the M5A X large is available again for whatever reason. So this is a great way to be prescriptive in what you want and get that in the order that you want. Maybe it's a cost angle, right? So, the X large is going to be less than the 2X large. So this is one way to do this. And we're going to combine kind of the two ideas that we were talking about earlier. I'm going to use specifying instance attributes. So this is what we call attribute-based instance selection, or ABIS. Some people just say ABS. And the idea here is much like the containers world, where if I'm in ECS and defining tasks, I'll say I want 2 vCPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. Or I'm using EKS, I'm defining pods. I'm going to say I want 1 gig of RAM and a half a CPU. So by doing something very similar, but at the infrastructure level, so choosing your EC2 instances, I can say, for example, I want 4 vCPUs, and what we're choosing M, so we'll go with 16 gigs of RAM. By defining these as no max, by defining just the minimum attributes that I need, and there's a wealth of other attributes you can include. So does it have local storage? Does it have expanded networking? Is it bare metal? We've got a lot of attributes here, which also we're going to talk about this one because it's a cost show. Price protection. I'll explain that in a sec, but I just wanted to show here. So we're looking to buy all of these on demand for our group. We can use Spot, absolutely. I think we should do another show on that if you haven't yet, Steph. And then from this, we can simply select those instances that fit. So we talked about the idea of price protection. Price protection is paying attention to what the lowest price instance you can get in your definition, what that costs, and would you be willing to spend more than that? And if so, how much? And so we can say that the on-demand price percentage, so the lowest price instance that matches, if we say 100%, that's all we want to spend. Or we can say we're willing to spend 50% more in order to get capacity. And in today's world with massive workloads going online, customers find themselves capacity constrained at times. And so with this idea of being able to select agnostically, like not choosing them. Just this is a good example of the heterogeneous model that we just want 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. The price protection will stop us from launching GPUs, which are extraordinarily expensive compared to a simple M instance. So that price protection is built in. And then we can do the same with Spot. Spot will base it on the lowest priced on demand. So if you launch a Spot instance that's going to cost more than on demand, we can stop it from launching and just wait till you get whatever other capacity you're targeting. So here we select the number of subnets that's going to run in. Do we want to touch on anything else in here? Am I skipping past?
I think one other thing I wanted to say was that some of the attributes are excluded by default. So things like including burstable, like T family instances. Even if you're matching the vCPUs in memory, types of instances like burstable, accelerator-based ones, like Steve was saying with GPUs, you need to explicitly add an attribute to opt into those if you want to use them.
I just accidentally moved my mouse the wrong direction and locked my screen. Sorry about that. So
well, let's do some questions while you bring up your share screen to fix that. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so we'll get a couple of these done. Any time difference to scale up Spot instance than I think it should be on-demand instance, but assuming no, it should be exactly the same, right?
Yep. Identical. So just to super quick clarification, Spot instances are the exact same instances you can get on demand. So how your AMI is built and whatever processes you have, that's how long it's going to take to launch on demand or Spot.
Exactly. And use those Spot. If you have applications that can handle the kind of spikiness and you don't need them constant, then check those out for a nice like up to 90% saving depending on your region. We just covered this, but just to confirm, can different instance types be selected for auto scaling? Start with the large and also small. Yes, we just like that, which is great.
So they can be included, but we don't vertically scale. And so I think that might be a qualifier on that particular question. We won't say you launched a 2x large, but you need an X large. But organically over time, if you have preferences defined or we're paying attention to the lowest price, based on what you're launching, then that can organically happen.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. We only got a couple more minutes. Steve, is there anything else you want to demo quickly before we wrap up?
I was just going to launch the ASG, but I think that's probably not exactly too thrilling. The idea we wanted to get across there is the idea of homogeneous, where you've got the single instance type, like an M5A X large, versus heterogeneous, where you can include more instance types to be able to get more capacity to prevent yourself from being put into a situation where a particular instance type doesn't exist when you go to launch in a new region, right? If you're using that same template. And then from a cost perspective, that we've got protections in there if you're using the attribute-based selection where we select for you.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. In the last minutes, we're just going to do our secret Richard summary. So Richard's been listening and we'll share his summary of all the fun things we've talked about. And I don't know what it says, so I get to read it first. So ASG is free and helps to optimize cost and resiliency. So choose life, choose auto-scaling.
Love
groups. Target tracking is user-friendly policy to help get started, and mixed instance groups provide cost and usage flexibility.
Fantastic. Brilliant. You want a job?
Yeah. I know, he's great, isn't he? I mean, he's not AI, he's a real person. Just to clarify before people ask that question. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We hope you've enjoyed today's session. We'll be back next week with a chat with Ali Whitman, who is a big name in the FinOps world, to talk all about her experience in the world of FinOps. But that is it from us. Make sure that you like, subscribe, favorite this video so you can come back to it, or just check out Keys to AWS Optimization. Our community hub channel has got all the links to all of the shows that we have in the past and in the future. But that is it from us. Thank you to my lovely guests, and bye for now. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Bye,
thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Shad.
Have a great day.